Are we good? Okay. In an attempt to stay on schedule, I'm going to begin. Please continue eating. I want to thank a few people that helped make today possible. The catering company, Sweet Potato Catering. I know I enjoyed the lunch. I hope you all are enjoying it as well. The advancement office, not myself, but everybody in the team that put so much effort into all of the details, including the placemats on the tables. Those are wonderful. Our student ambassadors that are helping today, thank you for being here, giving up your Sunday to help serve the food. No, thank you. I know I enjoyed reading the articles in the Norwalk Reflector for all of our inductees. So thank you to Don Holler and Mark Hazelwood for putting those articles together. It was a great insight to all of the accomplishments that our inductees have done over the years. And I enjoyed getting to know them better. So thank you. So I think we'll begin with the induction ceremony. We're recognizing Father Willman and Denny Dowdy, former St. Paul High School principal and dear friend, will be speaking about him. Thank you.
So I was going to get the book over here about the Convocation Center and go through it with you, one page at a time, because Father Willman was involved in every aspect of that project, but I'm not going to do that. That was from my wife. So I'm going to start with a story. Back in the spring of 1989, St. Paul High School was looking for a high school principal. And I called Father Willman and talked to him about the prospect of my putting my name in. And he said, well, you really should meet with the interim principal and have a discussion with him, and meet with the business manager and talk to him as well. Well, I talked to the interim principal, and he said, piece of cake job. He said, I sit here and I put my feet up on the desk and I just read newspapers. Nothing happening. It's easy. I went to see the business manager. He said, oh, Denny, we're going to close in 2 years. Enrollment's at an all-time low. It's just not going to happen. And then I went to meet with Father Willman, and he always called me Dennis. He goes, Dennis, the parish fathers will never allow the school to close, ever. And if you think we have financial problems, they'll take care of it. Don't worry about coming here, because we're going to have a school now and into the future. So I went home that night and said to my wife, Chris, can I apply for the job if I promise to only stay for 3 years? Because I was really excited, because Father Willman got me going. He really did. And she gave permission. 8 years later, I was still there. But Father Willman had a way of looking at things. You know, you talk about a glass half full. For Father Willman, the glass was 3/4 full to full. He was excited about everything. And then so much so that 8 months later, Jim Wozniak went to him and said, Father, we need to build a wrestling room. And Jim wanted to build it right back here. We had a bus garage back there and so on. And Jim had plans to build that thing. It was going to cost $100,000. I used to be a wrestling coach, so I thought it made a good sense to do that. He went to see Father Willman, and Father Willman said, no, you will not build a wrestling room. Father Willman said, you will build a gymnasium. And so Jim came over from the rectory, which was right next door, and said, we get to build a gym. I go, what? What? We talked about a wrestling room, which is $100,000. He's talking about a gym, which is at least $1 million. How are we going to do that? Well, Father Willman planted that seed, and a pretty incredible seed that he planted. And all the top parish fathers came together and established a committee. And that committee met every other week for 3 years before any real fundraising went on. Every bit of the plan was in place. We had architects, Tom Hypley, who was a graduate, designed the building and all that right up front. We knew what it was going to look like and went from there. And every step of the way, Father Willman said, you can do it. It's going to work. We'll find a way. Father Willman introduced us to the bishop in a very close way, so much so I could actually call the bishop from my high school office and they'd let me talk to him. Now that's a difficult thing in those days, but we had that kind of relationship because of Father Willman. And the bishop came and met with us a number of times and said, things are bad around the diocese. We're laying off staff. We just can't lend the money to schools and things like we used to. But Father Willman said, you guys will come up with the money. And guess what? It did happen. So my remembrance of Father Willman was when you'd go and visit him, it's going to work. We'll find a way. We'll get it done. You can get it done. He planted seed and then stepped out of the way. And so guys like Ed Davis and Dave Bliley and Jim Cooker, Rick Lynch, Nor Barman, Denny Camp, Rob Harst, so many people, Don Wheeler, and of course, Jim Wozniak, who was the chair of the whole thing, stepped forward and worked and worked and worked and worked. One of the first messages that we went out, Father Willman always said, find a way for people to invest in a project. They got to give their heart and soul into it. So we sent out $1 to all the alumni and booster people and said, take this $1 and you've got 1 year. Invest it, do whatever, and let's make that multiply so we can build this gym. And it worked. And it worked. Father Willman told us it would work, and it did. It's kind of like, you had the treasures, and did you hide it out in the garden? Did you invest it? Well, people returned that threefold and then some. And so within the first year of the fundraising, they had raised about $750,000. And I've got a quote from Father Willman. I was looking for it before and I couldn't find it, but just a second here. Let's see if I can get it. Our task over the last year has been mind-boggling. For the parish and community is a dream come true, this convocation center. And that was after the first year of fundraising. By 1994, from 1988 to 1994, the parish, the community, the school built a gym that rivaled any in the area. And our leader was Father Herb Willman. It's so appropriate. Jim Wozniak nominated him. Jim is ill right now and couldn't be here to present. But you don't often get a pastor or any leader that's willing to hand the job off, encourage you, work along the side of you, but let you go and get the job done. And that's what happened here. And it takes a special leader, I think, to do that. But we were so fortunate. So today, we induct Father Herb Willman into the Hall of Fame for St. Paul High School. It's so amazing what he did. We're so proud of what he did. We've accomplished so much because of what he did and allowed us to do. He loved sports. He loved children. And I would be remiss if I didn't tell 2 quick stories. One, he was the ski club advisor and he drove the bus. It was the scariest thing because Father Willman, when something came on in his head, he'd go, hey, did you know? And he's driving the bus and it's snowing. I go, Father, pay attention to the road, please, please, please. And after a ski trip, people would come and say, Denny, you got to get somebody to drive the bus for Father so he can just talk to people, because he was not the best bus driver. He loved to drive the bus, but he was not the best bus driver. Second story, and Carol Cooker reminded me of this one last night. She said, hey, tell the story about Father Willman when he had to go to the hospital. So here's the story. Carol was talking to him. Carol had the outdoorsman along with Jim, and they were talking about something with the Convocation Center, of course, and fundraising. And all of a sudden, Father Willman stopped talking. She goes, Father Willman, no response. He was gone. Now, that was not typical of Father Willman, so she called the rectory and said, please check on him because something's wrong. And they did. He was passed out. There was a leak in his furnace. It was above the garage, and he was overcome by carbon monoxide and could have died easily. But fortunately, Carol insisted they go up and check it out. And he was in the hospital a couple of days, but, he just survived. And of course, I called him at the hospital. He goes, oh, Dennis, how you doing? It's like, come on, Father, you almost died. You should be a little bit soft. No, he was enthused and excited. And one last story. Father Willman really adopted Father Harvey Keller as his sidekick. And throughout the time that Father was at the parish, Father Keller stood by his side. And boy, we love Father Keller and Father Willman both. And so today it's so good and so appropriate. We induct Father Herb Willman into the St. Paul High School Hall of Fame. So this is Father Willman's brother who joined us today, Father Herb Willman. Oh, one picture? How about you stand right here?
Thank you, Denny. That was beautiful. Martin Linder and I had the opportunity to meet with Carol Cooker a few weeks ago, and she shared that story about needing to call and to have someone check on Father Willman. That was a great relationship, and I'm glad they were able to check on him and everything turned out well. Our next inductee is Angie. I hope you don't mind calling you Angie. Angie Kalashewski, a graduate of 2003. And Nancy Miller was going to be presenting for her, but unfortunately she's not able to be here today. So her husband, Aaron Kalashewski, 98 graduate, will be presenting for her. Thank you.
Thank you. It's going to be hard following Denny because I don't have that much stuff prepared, unfortunately. But first of all, I'd like to say good afternoon and would like to congratulate all of those that are being inducted today. Today, I get the honor of introducing Angie, my wife. And, Mark Hazelwood wrote such a great article, excuse me, profiling Angie's athletic career that it made it kind of hard to decide what else could be said. Anybody that read the article or knows Angie knows that she had a very successful high school and collegiate athletic career. But it wasn't until we were driving home from the soaking wet game last night that it finally hit me what to talk about today. As we were driving home, we started going over our schedule for the week. 2 junior high volleyball practices, 3 junior high volleyball matches, 2 varsity volleyball matches, 1 junior high football game, and finish the week off with 5 games of softball on Saturday. And yes, that's just this week. So this is the typical week in our house. And she has people tell her all the time that, she's crazy for doing it. But out of all the records and out of all the accolades she has received while here at St. Paul's, I believe her greatest one is her work ethic. A work ethic that she applies to everything that she does. From teaching to coaching, she is going to do whatever needs to be done to make sure that the kids in her care are going to receive her absolute best so that it can bring out their absolute best. While at my daughter's softball tournament yesterday, I was standing in line at the concession stand when a parent walked up to me and wanted to have me tell Angie congratulations on her induction. She proceeded to tell me how much her daughter loves having Angie as a coach and is amazed by her daughter's growth since last year. To me, it's comments like this that are the greatest accolades a person can receive. To be able to go full circle, from beginning as an athletic, smart, young student athlete that took advantage of the wonderful coaches and mentors that she had here while at St. Paul's. Taking the things that they taught her to be the absolute best student athlete that she could be, and now being in the role as coach and mentor to our children and the other children she teaches and coaches. So I would like you all to join me in congratulating Angie on her induction this year.
I'm not a fan of talking in front of people, so it's thankfully made me cry. Coach Miller was supposed to be here today, and thankfully, my husband is very willing to step in situations like this. This is such an honor. I do appreciate all those kind words. First, I want to say congratulations to all those being inducted. Aaron, thank you. I want to say thank you for this amazing honor. This is truly a blessing and such an honor to be added to this group. I'm humbled and honored and just speechless. As I stand here today with my family present, it makes me appreciate so many things about our school. With me today, I have my parents, my grandparents, my sister and brother-in-law with their little one, you probably hear, and our 3 kids. These are the people that have got me here today, along with everybody else in this room. This school and what we do is put me here. My parents have followed me through every single thing that I've done, every single match, every single coaching match, every collegiate match, traveled around every place we've been. And my sister, she got drugged along, so I appreciate that she loves it as much as we do to this day. It's something that we've passed on to our kids, and when they get to ask us, have you ever been to this place or that place? Usually it follows with yes for volleyball, yes for this sport, and they get to ask questions. And on top of it, I get to tell them that I had my grandparents who were always with us because they did the same thing. They made the travels, they made the efforts, and they went with us. And I'm beyond thankful for everybody that's here. Thank you. Find my place. My sister also had to deal with me as a coach, so that can be a challenge. So I appreciate her for being here and doing that for all those years. I also want to tell Aaron thank you. He's been my rock through all of this, my biggest supporter. Although we weren't in school at the exact same time, he has been with me through my coaching endeavors and all the way from being, the biggest role at home when I'm not there because the fall is kind of crazy, as he just gave you a little glimpse of, to scouting other teams for me. I can't tell you the number of times I've come home and here's the next group you're playing in the tournaments, and here's what they are going to do, and this is what I think. And I called this person that we know, here's a few, a little ways away, and this is what they've said about them. So, that makes it all worth the while. You can't do what we do as coaches and athletes without support. So I really am appreciative of that. As our kids enter junior high this year, and I have the opportunity to coach at the junior high, and I help out with the high school still, it just reminds me of all of the dedication and the things that we get from this school and what we do, and the coaching that we receive and the administration that we have. I fully believe that that's why I am where I am today. We're taught that hard work, dedication, they pay off, and that's what you do, and that's how you get where you need to be. It's not handed to you. So as I try to pass that on to these junior high and high school kids, I wouldn't want my family or my kids to be anywhere else. This is where I learned how to be who I am and be successful, and that's why I want them here. And now to be able to be part of it and hand back to all of those other kids, it's a blessing. I don't look at it as anything other than that. It's just the opportunity to do what I love and hand it back. And I'm fortunate that I get to do it with my own children. There's many things that stick out along the way. Actually, Emily and I were talking about it just a tad bit when we walked in. Like, there's just so many memories, things that stick out. Obviously, state championship, the first one of the school, is by far my best time, memories, things that from that moment on, I knew what I wanted to do. I knew that I wanted to be that person that was able to come back and coach and do all those things and pass on those lessons that I've learned from Coach Miller and Coach Livengood and all the people that have been in my life. I've been fortunate enough to have Mr. Dowdy around, not only when I was here, but then when I was at Norwalk and as a mentor. I mean, it passes on. It's people that you know and you trust forever and you learn from, and all those things that they represent, you learn to do the same thing. So I'm very appreciative of it. To be back here coaching is a true honor and a blessing. So I'm just very thankful to be added to this great group. I wish everybody the best of luck, and congratulations to all of the other inductees. Thank you.
Aaron he was pulling at my heartstrings too. Congratulations, Angie. We wouldn't want your family anywhere else either. Next up, our inductee is Robert Grimacy, 1947 alum, and presenting for him is his daughter, Eileen Reed. Eileen?
Hi, I have traveled here from Idaho, where I have lived my whole life, and I'll tell you a little story about how I got there. But first of all, I just want to say thank you to Jenny. When I first received this notification that my dad had been nominated, I was just really blown away. His sister, Mary Ann, who was just next in line to him, he was the oldest of 6. She admired Dad. She was always a great supporter of him. And she was always the favorite destination when we came back to Ohio to visit our family here. And my wonderful cousins notified me. They're here with us today. And they've always been my connection here to my heritage here in Ohio. Many of you have read the bio about my dad. He was here at St. Paul and as a senior, and he had Sister Francello, who was his electronics teacher. And I think that that's where he had the seeds planted in his mind and heart and encouragement to go forward with dreams of becoming a nuclear physicist. He entered the Navy, and he was a navigator on the, I have to look it up, the SS Destroyer, I believe, the USS Destroyer. And I think that experience also gave him great confidence to go forward. He entered John Carroll University and obtained his master's degree in nuclear physics in 1957 with honors. And he always had a great love of the outdoors. He basically ran the dairy farm when his father entered the war, and he was the superintendent of excuse me, I just need to look this up. I can't remember. His dad was drafted into the war and helped build the ammunitions plant that was here in Ohio. And so Dad ran the whole farm during that time, and he milked 15 cows. I thought it would be kind of a fun thing to talk a little bit about his time when he was a teenager, because he worked so hard and he was kind of the man of the family at that time. One of the things that Dad did is he wrote poetry, and he told me very late in his life about how he had won the Ohio State Poetry Contest when he was a sophomore at high school at the Newberry School. In 1944, Dad was 16, a sophomore at Homerville High School in Homerville, Ohio. His English teacher, Mrs. Edwards, instructed the whole class to write a poem to submit to the State Ohio Poetry Day contest. Dad had a good friend, Steve Allen, who had one cow, Alice, and he was responsible for milking twice a day every day. Steve would often complain to Dad about his friend, about his having to milk his cow. Dad wrote this poem about his friend and won first place. Miss Edwards was so excited and proud that one of her students actually wrote a poem and won first place. And the reason that this is kind of funny is because Dad was milking 15 cows at the time, every day, twice a day, by himself. He had a Hinman milking machine that allowed one cow at a time to be milked. It was a Class B dairy, and only the cream was sold. The skim milk was fed to the pigs. They raised pigs and cows and feed. Dad was the primary farmer. His father, here it is, he was the superintendent of electrical construction in Cleveland. The farm was 160 acres. They grew 40 acres of corn, 40 acres of wheat, and 40 acres of oats. Dad drove the tractor and did all of the plowing and harvesting. And he also had a horse that he used to do a lot of his farming with. So here's his poem that he wrote when he was 16. The Friendly Cow. Oh, many's the poem I have heard to this day of the friendly cow and the milk which she gave. And these artists of poetry, I'd venture to say, have never milked a cow to this day. Because if they had, their tune would soon change from the gentle, sweet Bossy to the blasted dame. For I have a cow, she's not gentle or sweet, but the orneriest cuss that ever you'd meet. For I milk her at dawn and I milk her at dusk, and for hours at a time I fret and I fuss. Because the kicks and she wiggles and she switches her tail, and many's the time she has knocked over my pail. And the tail of my cow was devised by a demon, for each time she switches her eye has a gleam in. This creature will drive me to the end of my wits, and I swear she will be the death of me yet. Raise pigs or raise geese or raise sheep or a duck, but don't raise a cow or you're plumb out of luck. So that's a little bit about Dad when he was young. After he moved to southern Idaho, he worked for the Idaho National Engineering Laboratory there, and he was part of the nuclear reactor physics. And as a child growing up, I was the second daughter. I didn't know much about what my dad did because most of his work was classified. He worked, he was part of the American Nuclear Society, and he was nominated in his physics group to present the papers. Every 3 years, I believe they met around the nation, and they would present their new findings. And Dad was a great writer, and he was extremely dedicated. His greatest passion was his math, and he had really a genius for math. I can remember as a youngster many times getting up in the middle of the night, and he would be at the dining room table with literally 6 or 8 pieces of paper lined up, and he would be doing these calculations in the middle of the night. Because he said, well, I just woke up and I had a breakthrough and I had to get up and I had to work on this. And it was just amazing. And then in the morning he would get up and he would be so full of energy and inspiration and be off to work and say, I think I figured it out. And I think about now we have computers, and Dad actually developed an algorithm that's being used around the world to this day. And it was probably an algorithm that was programmed into a computer software at this time. So that was one of his greatest accomplishments. He was part of the Department of Energy project at Brookhaven National Lab on Long Island in New York. and he designed this algorithm to calculate the cross sections of the elements of the core of a nuclear reactor. He also was very much involved in creating a conceptual design of new reactor systems and analysis for radiation shielding for reactor systems. And I know he also worked on what they called the Star Wars project, which was part of the Cold War. And I remember southern Idaho is a very sagebrush desert area. And we got to go out one time and visit his work. And it was back in the late 60s, you know, and it had one of those gigantic computers that takes up the whole room. It had the negative airflow system in it. And we went in there and walked around. It was bigger than I was. And it was just amazing to think that my dad was part of something that was really changing the world. I think that right now in history, with the climate change and with everything that's happening in our world, Dad was one of those people that had a foresight for clean energy. Dad was a person who struggled with intimate and close relationships, but he had a tremendous capacity for agape love. He was generous and kind to those in need, strangers in a tough spot, and very charitable for people on the fringes of society. And I think that came from his Catholic upbringing and the culture here in this community and in this school that really had an impact on his life and built a strong moral character. One of the things that Dad told me is that he really struggled the first couple of years of college in pursuing his math and physics. And he said, I just studied and studied and studied and studied. And pretty soon by my junior year, I had caught up with all of the guys who had not been in the military, who had just gone straight into college. And he said, but that ethic of study is what propelled me then into my graduate program and really, I think, propelled him throughout his career. I can remember he was a great admirer of Albert Einstein, and he said, he always used to repeat that quote of his that says, success is 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration. So he always acknowledged that it was really hard work and confidence and dedication that brought you to your goals. And I think also his education at John Carroll University also formed him. He was a strong Catholic leader in our family. He was a Boy Scout leader. He was a Knights of Columbus member. And he was always very, very just strong in terms of leading our family and making sure that we were keeping God at the center of our lives. I remember one story I wanted to tell is when I was about 11 years old, we lived in a very rural area and we lived kind of on the edge of a hill. And it was in the spring, and one of the neighbor kids from our neighborhood who had been in his Boy Scout troop came running down the hill, and he was like, Mr. Grimacy, can you help us? And he was just pure white. He was just scared to death. And Dad jumped up and ran and literally ran up into the hills. And one of his buddies, they were up there shooting with the 22 gauge shotgun, and he had shot himself in the abdomen. And Dad ran up there and picked up that kid and just literally ran down the hill. And my mom had called an ambulance, and this was back in like 1968. And he had to ride in a ambulance about 65 miles away and had trauma surgery, and he survived. But it's like people in our community knew where they could go to get help, and they would come to Dad for that. He loved to hunt, and that's why he wanted to go to Idaho. He and my mom taught themselves to ski on wooden skis and leather boots on the slopes of Idaho with no grooming. I can't believe they did that. And this was when they were in their early 30s, so they were not really young. And they taught our whole family to ski. We all ski, and we're all, now our kids are skiers. And that's just something that Dad gave us. And it was a wonderful, healthy, fun family activity that we enjoyed. Dad was part of a hunting group, and they hunted in Montana. And he went with the same core group for 30 years, every year, to the same place. There were a couple of priests that were part of that core group. There's a story that was also printed in his bio about he was up there camping one year, and they had an elderly gentleman up there with them. And of course, they always ate very well. My dad was a very good cook. It just seemed like whatever Dad did, he did well. You know, he pursued it, he read about it, and he learned how to do it well. He was deeply engaged in life. And they were cooking these big, thick, juicy steaks. And one of the guys, the older man, he was eating the steak and he choked on it. And they were in a very remote area. And my mom was a registered nurse who worked in surgery and in the ER. And he said he remembered my mom telling him this story about a guy who came in and they had to do an emergency tracheotomy on him. So Dad just got his hunting knife out, and one of my cousins knows this knife well. He used it for everything. And he said, well, we're going to have to do a tracheotomy. And all of the other guys that were there, a couple of them were still out hunting. They just looked at Dad and they were just freaked out. And Dad just got right down on the ground and cut open his neck and opened up the trachea and pulled out the steak. And then they stuffed an old T-shirt in his neck and put some pressure on it and threw him in the back of the Jeep, and they drove 200 miles to the Missoula hospital. And the surgeon, when he came in, said, wow, you did a pretty good job. You got about an eighth of an inch from the jugular vein, but you didn't hit it. And it was just things like that Dad would do. He just jumped up and did things. And he was like, well, the most important thing is to help people. And he wasn't afraid. And I really just have always admired that courage that my dad had. And it's something that has helped me in my life tremendously. Dad was always willing to give anything. Like, he was one of those people that, when we were on a vacation, he would come out of the restaurant and he'd see like a transient homeless guy there, and he would stop and talk to him. And he would take him to the store and buy him a coat or give him one of his old backpacks. Whatever, he tried to meet the needs of people that he met along the way. And he was very open and charitable to people that were on the fringes of society. My dad was a really large man. He was a big, tall man. He was about 6'3", and he had really big hands. And one of my greatest memories that I'd like to close with, it's etched deeply in my mind and heart, is the feeling of holding Dad's hand. Even as an adult, when I would hold his hand, it was just gave me a feeling of security, protection, and just that fatherly love and guidance. I'm very, very grateful for that. And I'm just grateful for my dad and for his life and for his wonderful moral character and inspiration. So thank you for letting me be here today.
Eileen. Thank you. You're very welcome. Thank you for sharing those special memories with us. Eileen, can we get a quick picture? Do you want me to be in it? Here, we'll step over just a minute. There you are. Thank you again. Next, we have Monica Nash, a 1989 alum that is being inducted today, and presenting for her is her son, Charlie Nash.
That works. You're welcome.
Before I get into it, I first wanted to say, when my mom approached me and asked to give her introduction speech today, I was incredibly honored. Not just because the chance to do this for my own mother is literally a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, but the chance to do it for any woman with such stature and accomplishment is an incredible opportunity. I thought that to start, since there's been a lot of talk about the different accomplishments, the different stats and records that my mom holds, I would say a few that maybe not as many people know. She holds the record for saying my first and middle name the loudest, particularly when I'm in trouble. She also holds that record for my two brothers as well. She has the fastest laugh to injury response time when my dad hurts himself. She's considered an honorary She's considered an honorary ambulance driver due to the number of trips she's taken out to the ER with us. Lastly, she's number one overall on the list of positive influence in many people's lives, including mine. Like many others, I needed guidance from her to find success in my athletics and academics. Whether it's coming home in the summer and asking my brother Nate and I if we got our summer miles in, helping me boil 5 pounds of chicken every week to prep for lunch during wrestling season, or scolding me for my grades, not because of the expectations she set, but because she knew I could do better on my own. This willingness to help extends much further than just family. I listen to her stories of helping friends when they're in tough situations, the late practices she stays at. I think back to the extra lunches she would pack for my teammates that she knew wouldn't have any lunch of their own. I think about the conversations she's told me about that she's had with her athletes that, whether she knows it or not, they're going to think back to next time they're faced with a difficult decision. Monica is also the first person by your side in success and in failure. She knows how to support others and encourage them to give their best in competition and in life. At the same time, she knows when they just need a kick in the rear to get back to where they need to be. She's somebody who enjoys giving back to the community that helped her accomplish so much, who dreams of being able to help those younger than her achieve more than she ever did. She's somebody that deserves to be remembered by this institution for years after she is gone, not only for her academic achievements, but for the lives that she has coached, influenced, built up, and nurtured. Thank you.
Charlie, wait. I'm going to get a picture with you. All right. Thank you, Charlie, for that introduction. I would like to start by thanking my husband, Pat, for nominating me. Your love and support over the last 30 years is one of the many things I am grateful for. As I've often said, our boys got their athleticism from their mother, and I will take this as your sign of agreement. I would also like to give a special thanks to my parents, Don and Chum, for all of their support over the years, not just with my running career, but in life as well. My mom would have loved this. She was such a big supporter of all of her children and grandchildren. So much so that before big meets, she and the other cross-country moms, together with a group, would toilet paper each other's houses for good luck. They would literally toilet paper their own homes. Who does that? Oh. I would also never have to worry about packing my own food for weekday meets. My dad would always warn me he may not make it there due to work, but he would always be there with his lunchbox full of food. Thank you to my sister Anne for strongly encouraging that I run cross country in 7th grade, and my cousin Jennifer for the encouragement to continue running when I transferred to St. Paul as a high school freshman. Thank you to Coach Rosbert and Coach Colvin for their guidance. I truly believe I would not have been half the runner I was without their coaching. My love for running has never faltered. As an assistant coach for the Norwalk Truckers several years ago, I was able to share my knowledge with runners in that program, which included my son Nathan. Not many individuals get that opportunity, and it is something I will always treasure. I have continued to use my experience as an assistant coach at my alma mater, St. Paul. My hope is that I will be able to witness this generation of runners surpass my accomplishments and be right there with them to celebrate. Finally, I would like to thank my family and friends who are in attendance today, the nomination committee for this honor, as well as my former and current runners. Thank you to Tim Fitzgerald for asking me to coach many years ago, and last but not least, the coaching staff of St. Paul's cross country team, Bob Paps, Joe Pertner, Jack Fisher, and Sid Kramer for allowing me to be a part of this amazing program, and my brother Paul, just because he's awesome. I am truly honored to be inducted into the St. Paul Hall of Fame today. This is something I will never forget, and I thank you for all of that.
My oldest, Grace, is a freshman and in her third year of running cross country. And when I drop her off at practice, I see Monica there, and I'm just learning, yes, she's standing up for practice, but just how involved she is and the accomplishment that she's made. So I'm sorry it took 3 years, but thank you for all that you do. And I made sure that Grace read that article too, so she knew. But thank you and congratulations. Our next inductee is Jerry Heddle, a 1970 alum, and presenting for Jerry is Father Michael Valaruki.
Mother Teresa once said that we cannot all do great things, but we can all do small things with great love. Now, I'm not typically one to argue with a saint, but here today I am. 2 weeks ago in our gospel, we were reminded that if you wish to become the first and the greatest, then you must become the servant of all and the least of all. And so even though Mother Teresa says that doing small things aren't great, I believe our Savior tells us that that is where greatness in fact lies. And that is something which Jerry Heddle embodies in everything that he does. If you read the article in the Norwalk Reflector, you saw that Monsignor Ken wrote that there are certain men whose greatness comes in being in the background, such as speechwriters. Jerry's greatness comes from being in the background, from doing the small things with great love. He's been a constant source of support for the priests of this parish for a number of years. And he comes with a sense of humility that is unparalleled. Shortly after my time here, as Jerry and I were talking, he mentioned that one of his greatest joys in helping in this church is that he learns something new from every priest that comes in. It's an amazing statement to make. Because as a young priest, I know sometimes we come in thinking we have all the answers and knowing everything. And here's Jerry, who has been a thriving member of the Catholic faith for longer than most of these associates have probably been alive. And he's humble enough to know that there's still much to learn about our faith and our church. What a great example for all of us to embody that humility and to engage in every act that we do with a great amount of love, not just for the other, but for the God for whom we serve. And so it is my pleasure to present Jerry with this plaque, inducing him into the St. Paul Hall of Fame.
Gee whiz, thanks, Father. Such kind words. And also Monsignor, two of the best priests that anybody could have in their parish. Well, all the priests we've had have been so super. They've been such a big part of my life, guiding me and me being able to work with them. And I'd just like to thank everybody here, especially the Hall of Fame committee and Jenny, and for even thinking of nominating me. And I think I would like to share this award with so many different people, especially starting with my parents. They were such a strong Catholic mother and father. They sacrificed greatly for my brother and myself to send us to St. Paul's School. And the school continued with that education to nurture that love of God with all the different sisters of Notre Dame that taught us through the years, and all the great lay people that were also teachers. And it's just been a wonderful experience to know that Jesus has been such a big part of my life. And I just love what I do, and I love the people of this parish. I love Jesus so much, and I'm just so happy I've had the good health and the fortune to help this project along, that I can keep on being good help to the priests. Over the years, I've counted up many of the priests I've worked with. I don't want to start mentioning names because I know I'm going to forget somebody, but it's over 20 plus priests that I've worked with over the years, plus seminarians that have come in over the years for their year of internship. And like Father Michael said, I learned so much from all of them. They all come in with, they're all so similar, but yet they're all different. Everybody has a different personality. You can just watch them and you can kind of read what they're doing, and you can learn so much, not even having to ask a question. You can just kind of absorb it and just, see what they're doing. And it's such a joy for me. I get to see these guys every day, and sometimes 2-3 times a day. And it's always just a great joy. And so I just very much would also like to thank people in our liturgy committee. I've been a member of that committee for probably 12 plus years, maybe even longer, I don't know. But people like Mark and Marion, they've helped me along over the years. And, it's a growing experience. It's something that just is not going to happen. It comes a little bit at a time. And, I'm 68 years old, and I'm still learning. The day you quit learning is the day they might as well bury you, because, this is a growing experience to keep loving Jesus. And I also like to say hello to my brother over in the Philippines. He's watching us on YouTube this afternoon. It's about 2:30 in a Monday morning over there, so I don't know if he's up watching or if he's going to watch it later, but I just want to say hello to him. He was one of the people that wrote a nomination letter about me a couple years ago, and he never told me, and shame on him for doing that. And also, I'd like to thank the committee and everybody else, and I just want to let you know that my family is the church. This is a great church family. I love every one of you, and I'm so happy that I could be of service to the whole parish, and especially to the priests and everyone else. Thank you very much.
Thank you for all you do, Jerry. Next inductee is Coach Charles Mack, and presenting for Charles Mack will be his great niece, Maureen Blake.
First of all, I'd like to thank the Hall of Fame committee for this athletic award from my uncle. It means a lot to my family. The school would honor him in this way. I didn't have the privilege of knowing my great uncle Charles. However, his memory has always been kept alive among family members. My own father, the late Eugene Mack, was very close to him while growing up in Norwalk. So it seems fitting that my father be the one to submit an application for him. I'm not going to list all of his military credits. I think the records speak for themselves. But I am here to share a little bit more about the challenges he faced and the person he was. He gained a reputation as a hero in the Battle of Argonne during World War I. The battle was one of the most significant battles of that time, and one in which Charles said himself broke the German army. There were many notable individuals that were a part of the battle at one time or another, including Captain Harry Truman, Colonel George Patton, General Douglas MacArthur, Medal of Honor recipient Sergeant Alvin York, and many others, including Charles' older brother, George. Americans arriving on the front lines in France weren't really well thought of at that time and considered weak from lack of fighting experience. The scene itself was one of confusion, with both French citizens and French soldiers fleeing the premises. Battle had taken place there before between the French and Germans, and the battlefield was covered with dead and unburied soldiers. Critical supplies and ammunition was slow in getting to the troops due to poor roads, and the weather didn't help either, as it had rained several days before. The grounds were saturated, it was cold, and heavy fog had settled in. Before them lied a dense forest penetrated with experienced German soldiers. Their positions were well fortified with their machinery hidden behind large rocks and in ravines along the river. Snipers were hiding in trees. 3 and 4 rows of chest-high barbed wire had been strung throughout the forest. And as the battle raged on and Germans began to retreat, would leave devious explosive devices behind. But the biggest enemy that the Americans would face proved to be one that they would never actually see, and that would come in the form of poisonous gases. One of my uncle's war comrades remembered that during one hot engagement, Charles' unit was ordered to fall back and support the right wing. He was put in charge of the company at that moment, and having a little extra time on his hands, used his machine gunners to such a good advantage that a large group of prisoners were taken. Military experts regarded it as an extraordinary piece of work. In my uncle's own words, he described the day of battle in which he was injured. Their day began at 12 a.m. with the troops standing in their trenches until about 5:30, when it was still a little dark. During that time of waiting, Harry Truman's unit fired over 2,900 pieces of artillery at the German army. One could only imagine what that was like, hearing all of that noise and knowing when it ended, it was your turn to get out of that trench and go straight into battle. As Charles was recovering from the battle in a French hospital, wrote home that he was struggling with the fact that he was there and his men were up fighting on the front lines. He requested to be returned to his unit as soon as he was able and joined them moving on up to fight in Belgium. As fighting ended there, he was part of a group that was presented with the Medal for Valor from the King of Belgium and several citations of bravery from the French. War ended, Charles came home and returned to the business field as owner of North News Agency. Time was very tough in those days, and he was known to let customers charge on their accounts and pay along as they could. He lent a hand to returning veterans who were jobless and in need of financial support. He used his influence with the War Department and helped soldiers who had been wounded. He was appointed the Assistant Fire Chief of Norwalk and organized the volunteer unit. He joined various organizations and started the local American Legion, where he was post commander for 2 terms, and he was instrumental in the organization of several additional legions throughout Huron County. In 1920, he started Norwalk's first custom of commemorating Armistice Day, now known as Veterans Day. He rejoined his old Company G unit of the National Guard and was promoted to captain. His unit was very active and one of the first responders on site to lend a hand to the city of Lorraine after a tornado touched down there in June of 1924. He became an avid fundraiser, raising funds for several different organizations. He was also known as a man of faith, and one of his cherished possessions was a wooden rosary that he brought home with him from France. That same rosary was hung in the Mack family home for many years. As a member of St. Paul's Church, took an interest in developing a sports program. Undaunted by a lack of enthusiasm for his efforts, remained focused on his goal and developed the first basketball team, winning the Inter-Church League competition in 1921. Total points for opposing teams that year were 85, and St. Paul's was 237, with their biggest victory over the Church of Christ with a score of 76-13. Small beginnings for a school that eventually produced several state champions. His funeral was one of Norwalk's largest ones, with dignitaries from all over the state. He flew into town by plane, which was quite a sight for Norwalk in those days. The church was filled to capacity. His funeral was covered extensively in write-ups by both Norwalk Reflector and St. Paul's Look Ahead. His legacy as a soldier was remembered for several years after he was gone, with an annual Memorial Day service at his grave by his National Guard unit of Company G. And years later, during World War II, by my own father, who stated that he carried Charles' ID tags with him for all 36 days of the Battle of Iwo Jima. In reading all the articles on my uncle, I was moved by various ways he was remembered and referred to. A loving brother, an esteemed friend, an honest man, an intrepid leader, a hero. A philanthropist whose interests were beyond dollars and cents. A person who gave all he possessed of his natural talents, exceptional administrative and executive ability to form and keep in existence so many worthwhile organizations. Captain Charles Vincent Mack was a remarkable man. He led a remarkable life, and he started what has become a remarkable athletic program here at St. Paul's. And I think that is something that we can all be proud of. Thank you.
Thank you, Maureen. Our next inductees are John and Sue Riley, and presenting for them are Tavis and Emily Riley. I'll let you break the plaque in hand.
Good afternoon. My name is Tavis Riley, and I am John and Sue's middle son. And this is my wife, Emily. Thank you for allowing us the opportunity to introduce two of the greatest people we know. On behalf of our entire family, both here and afar, Grandma Crawford, New York, and all those watching down from above.
For those that know John and Sue, or as they're affectionately called in our family, Papa, Chief, and Ama, or Fashion, Old Fashioned, which is, if you know her, that's entirely correct, to try and do justice to their service to this school in a 5-minute introduction could never be done. I'm sure you've all read about their many accomplishments and gifts to the school and to the church over the past several weeks and the great articles that have been put out. Many of you have worked hand in hand with them along the way, and you've also seen their constant desire to make things around them better, to be faithful stewards to this school and to this faith community.
The list of the accomplishments and contributions goes on for miles, but perhaps the best thing about them is after all these years, and no matter how long the list grows or the donations are given or the hours are passed, you would never know it was them. They do not do it for the spotlight. They would never take public credit for anything, from the various buildings on campus to the recreation of the preschool that their grandkids now attend. They never complain about the hardships of installing the windows or on any of the projects or festivals or anything that they were involved in, or challenges of raising the millions of dollars for the campaigns and endowments throughout the years, or the hours spent donating their time as true volunteers. In fact, if you ever did complain, they would be the first to defend it and put you in your place. To Mom and Dad, this is God, or to John and Sue, this is God's work. They just are the messengers and extend his hands.
Probably what's perhaps more extraordinary about this couple is the fact that every interaction you've likely had with John and Sue, whether with them independently or with them together, has left you feeling positive, uplifted, grateful, better about your own personal self, or maybe even more educated about a topic, right, Chief? They don't judge. They don't criticize. They don't blame. They find ways to work through stressful or hard times by giving more of themselves to others.
Dad always talks and expresses that the more you give, the more you get in return. And I don't know if he got that from his mom, Grandma Bertha. She would always say, live more like a river. Let all your gains flow through you and onto others. Don't be a pond and let it come into you. Or maybe the other reason is because in our industry, we're in a lot of unknown ground conditions, and you could hit something and not really know. Dad would go to church, say a prayer, and I've called Mom and Dad with those problems in myself, and the next day that rock's not there. The ground conditions changed to more favorable to be able to get our projects done. It's just the way that they've done it all over the years. Whatever the situation is, Mom and Dad have always relied on God in every aspect of their lives.
While John and Sue are as strong of a force independent of each other as they are together, one would not be here without the support of the other. Sue goes along for the ride when John has a crazy idea about a new project, which if you ask her is about every other day, or if he wants to save a buck by not hooking the camper water up for the night when they're down in Florida. John happily entertains large family gatherings, Sue's family's visits, and a weekly Amma Day when she asks him to clear his schedule to be the kid for a day, helping make memories with their 6 favorite little ones.
Collectively, they don't just support the school. They support the efforts of us 3 boys, their work, their family lives, and showing us the support through their time and from their mission trips to Honduras while we were in high school, showing us how to give our time and our efforts through coordinating and loading up a semi-truck full of donations to head to Houston. They support their daughter-in-laws with everything from making a meal or dropping off a beautiful bouquet of flowers to offering to babysit the grandkids so the big kids can have a date night. They support their family and friends with the gift of their time, their company, and their communication. Their general thoughtfulness and generosity to causes important to them around the world. They don't just support local charities. They support family-focused, disaster relief, and much more. And most importantly, they support all of us in the Norwalk Catholic community with their prayers and dedication to the mission that's so close to our hearts. Their gift of giving just does not stop.
So we'd like to say to you on behalf of everybody in this room and those that you have touched over the years, Norwalk Catholic would not be where it is today without the 2 of you. We have all been touched by your goodness, by your kindness, by your heart, by your service all these years. It's because of the 2 of you that this community is thriving. It's because of the 2 of you that the legacy of Norwalk Catholic, all these pictures around us here and all the people that we touch, will carry forward to the next generation. Congratulations on your induction into the Hall of Fame. We're so proud to be your family and we love you. Put it down for you.
Thanks, I got to know it was gonna be me. That helps. Thank you, sweetheart. Oh, boy. That was beautiful, thank you. I get to do the talking. That's probably a good thing if you've ever spent very much time talking with John. We just are truly honored to be here today. Those were beautiful words, and we surely appreciate them. Maybe a little bit overboard. I'll tell you, everybody in this room and on these walls and this whole place is responsible. And in this booklet, all those names that we're so honored to be a part of now are responsible for the great place that Norwalk Catholic School and St. Paul Parish is. And we're just really honored and grateful to be a part of it all. And we feel that everything that we've just been so blessed, and everything that we have received is really the Lord's. And it's just our job to figure out what to do with it and what He wants us to do with it. And that's what we've tried to do over the years, and you've all helped us do that. And we've just been really thrilled to be able to do that together. And we also share this award with the people that have come before us, our parents, my mom in New York that the kids mentioned, and John's mom, who certainly was a wonderful example for us. And I remember our first Christmas sitting in her living room and in a big group around the Christmas tree, and having her pass out a stack of envelopes and encourage her children to choose 2 or 3 of those envelopes to contribute to those charities. And so that's what she taught, and where we've kind of come from. So thank you so much, and we'd like to congratulate everyone else that is being inducted today, and say just how honored we are to be part of this prestigious group of folks. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Last but definitely not least, our next inductee is 1981 alum Edward Young, and presenting on his behalf is Dennis Dowdy and Marty Tremmel.
So I was fortunate to coach Ed during his quest to be a 2-time state champ in wrestling. And boy, before I go on, I'd like to congratulate all the inductees today. And I'm so proud of all of you. Just, we're in the presence of greatness, really, we are. And so we're very fortunate. Anyway, so the first time I saw Ed wrestle, it was at, I believe it was a junior high conference meet. And I was watching this young man, and he was a little bit cocky. He was. But he had some real skills. And as I watched, it was a kind of person, as a coach, you know, you look for certain things. As a wrestling coach, I look for someone with good hips. That sounds bad, but it really is in wrestling. That's important. The Russians used to say that all good wrestlers had great hips. In other words, they had to be able to lift and throw and do all those things. Well, Ed had good hips. He had good hands. Now, that's another silly thing that you might not think about, but that grip is so important. So he had good hips, he had good hands, he had a good head. In other words, his head was in the right position. And again, as a coach, that's what you look for, right position and so on. So he had those things, hips, hands, head. And one more thing I noticed he had, and it was heart. And that's so big in everything that you do. It doesn't matter throughout life. If you have that heart, you can achieve great things. So as an 8th grader, I saw that. Head, hands, hip, and most of all, heart. So I thought, well, this kid could be a real good one. And we started kind of a campaign. Now, Ed, sometimes he and I butted heads a little bit along the way. Coaches push kids beyond what they would really like to be pushed at times. And I had high expectations for him. I really did. And all our kids, I believed in them strongly and believed they could achieve great things. And I really thought that Ed could be that great leader because he could do just about anything. You taught him something, he learned it. It was really good. Anyway, so Ed was a solid wrestler his freshman and sophomore year. He did good things. He almost qualified for state his sophomore year, but he didn't quite get there. And I made sure all our kids got to go to the state wrestling tournament, even if they didn't qualify. And I remember Ed and Brett Hoax looking out over the rail in St. John's Arena, watching the floor, watching Jim Colvin, who ended up being a state runner-up. And I knew that Ed had set a goal that he was going to be there the next year. You could see it. And the other kids that were watching, you just knew it was going to happen. And that's a kind of a special thing as a coach when you see that. So Ed's junior year began, and he ran cross country. And I know Ed attributes his stamina and so on to cross country. I think it was something more. The coach for cross country was Mike Reardon, and he didn't put up with any crap from anybody. He just didn't. And if there was any nonsense being said, he didn't accept it, did he, Ed? No way. And I think that really helped Ed, along with the running and all the endurance and all that stuff that goes with it, but also no crap. Do what you're supposed to do, get it done, and be all about it. So we went out and started that wrestling season, and Ed suffered one loss his junior year. And that was a kid by the name of Dan Tank from Genoa in the Port Clinton Invitational. And Dan Tank ended up being state champ in Class AA that year. And so he lost 2-1 to him. And to this day, I believe that Ed could have beat him. Ed kind of went into a shell in that match and didn't quite do the things that we'd worked on. But he got beat by the eventual AA state champ, 2-1. We drilled in our wrestling room, which is right here, by the way. And every Thursday we'd roll up the mats and set up for bingo. And then on Friday we'd tear it down again and try and clear the smoke out of the place, because in bingo, everyone seemed to smoke. I don't know why, but they did. Anyway, we did something called a perfect takedown drill. And we do a variation of 10, 12 takedowns, and we do it over and over and over and over, and the kids would get sick of it. But in a tough match, those kids could go to those moves and they'd hit them and they'd hit them. And so it was a great thing. Ed could hit every takedown and in a match that we ever tried. And in a match, if it was a tough match, I could give him direction, switch off to a single, switch off to a double or whatever. And he did it because he had just drilled that to, I would say, almost perfection. It was a great thing. His signature takedown as a junior was a fireman's, used to dump, sometimes a barrel roll, whatever, but it was a variation off that. Later on his senior year, he developed a low single, and it was the best single leg I've ever seen on any kid. And I'm telling you, I've watched a lot of wrestling over the years. And he hyperextended my knee more times when he hit that on me, let me tell you. So he developed and developed and developed. Junior year, he had some tough matches, but I'm going to tell you what, he dedicated himself, and each match improved just a little bit more, a little bit better version of himself the next time on that mat. And he ended up going for that state championship his junior year, and he achieved it. And it was just a tremendous thing. And he was the first state champ other than the team championship in football. He was the first state champ, individual champ at St. Paul High School. And he really was a groundbreaking. And all our kids were watching. All our wrestlers were watching. The school was watching that state champion and what it meant for us, because you knew you could achieve at the highest level at Little St. Paul High School. You could do it. And so it was really breakthrough, I thought, at the time. Ed was a product of many great coaches, from Bill Bout to Denny Corrigan, Paul Bull. Many people contributed. Mike Reardon as cross-country coach. Many people contributed to his success, and I think we're really proud of that he encapsulated that. So anyway, senior year, and you'd think, okay, returning state champ, piece of cake, just go on and be state champ again. It was a hard, hard road. It was tough. The pressure was immense. Everybody was looking to knock him off. They just were. He had to battle the weight a little bit, right, Ed? It was tough. It was tough. And in the wrestling room, Ed for a while had that little edge, and he liked to make people squeak just a little bit. He hurt them. And he said, Ed, you can't hurt your teammates. But I mean, he was tough. Can you imagine wrestling a state champ every day in practice? What a pain that would be. Well, our kids got it. The Jaworskis and the Hoaxes and all of them, they had to wrestle that state champ every day. And somewhere halfway through the season, we met with Ed and his dad, and we had a nice talk about what he needed to do. And Ed became a coach in the room too. From that time on, he was helping the other kids get better. And we'd have college coaches sitting there watching practice because they wanted Ed to go to their school. It was the most amazing thing. And I had to deal with any college coach that came in. You had to show some kind of signature move when you came in. You had to teach our kids something or you couldn't be in the room. And they did, and it was good. But what pressure on a 17, 18-year-old young man to repeat as a state champ. Well, anyway, long story short, obviously, Ed became that second state championship. And so proud of that. It's never been done here, a second-year state champ. But here's what Ed said after he got that second championship, and it struck me. He attributed his success to God-given talent. Not his talent, God-given talent. He had an intense desire to win. On match day, he practiced his moves in his head continually, that visualization that's so important. His teammates, cross-country, his family and friends made such a difference in his life. Finally, though, he attributed his success to God. There are so many stories I could tell and so many challenges associated with a two-time state champ. And I'm so proud of him and excited to be able to nominate him for the Hall of Fame, but also to be presenting today. But I'm done for right now, and Marty Trummel has a few things to say as well. Marty?
Thank you, everyone, and thank you, Mr. Dowdy, for allowing me to present here for really a great experience. And I know I'm between you and outside here, so I'm going to try to be brief. Jenny Ridge reminded me that my comments need to be brief, but since we have a two-time state champion, I just want to warn you, I get twice the time. But you know, it's being a recent graduate of St. Paul and alumni here, and being a classmate and a teammate and a friend of Edward Young is just a tremendous experience. You've heard Coach Dowdy from the coaching perspective, but I would just want to give you a couple of thoughts from the classmate friend perspective. And a warm welcome to his wife, Ying. Thank you for being here, and his family, his loving family, his children and grandchildren. We met in elementary school, and not at this Catholic school, but at another Catholic school. And they had a grade 4 biddy program. And if you know something about biddy wrestling, you know how important it is to be a part of a program that takes young people and gives them that desire. And I would just want to give a shout out to all of you coaches in the room, that you have these young, immature, impressionable, vulnerable young people. And it's so important. Your work is so valued and so important because you produce winners and you produce success and you produce champions. And in this case, a remarkable, never seen before two-time state champion. I came to St. Paul in the 7th grade. Ed came to the St. Paul in the 8th grade. We began the first junior high wrestling program at St. Paul. Coach Dowdy was really instrumental in putting that together for us. And Coach Dowdy touched on a couple of other things that were really instrumental to Ed's success. As you know from the program, he's one of 7 children. And what you may or may not know, that he has 5 sisters. I want to tell you how important it is to have 5 sisters. Not that I have that experience, but I know Ed does. I'm not sure, and maybe we've never spoke about this before, Ed and I, but I'm not sure that he would be really as successful in his championship journey without those 5 sisters. To me, it was remarkable. That was a complete team Ed, aside from the coaching, aside from his teammates. That journey of all Ed all the time, and he being able to rely on them, and they being that voice of thoughtfulness, of reason, strength, criticism, and probably most importantly, love when you're going through the rigors of what Ed had to accomplish. There's a handful of state champion qualities that you would see in somebody like Ed, and we're just going to list a couple of them before we wrap up today. Obviously, you need to be committed to your sport. In Ed's case, you can't be good, you can't be very good, you can't be excellent as a wrestler. You have to be simply outstanding. Coach Dowdy touched on this, and you have to really know and appreciate he was absolutely outstanding. He had a determined drive to win. He was tremendously focused, and he trained continuously. They talk about the mats here and the rolling up of the mats and putting them back down and train, train, train. Ed wouldn't train just here. He would find the best wrestlers in the area, and he would train with them. He had a diet and an eating pattern 40 years ago that so many of us thought strange and unusual that is all the rage today. He had a mental approach. Coach Dowdy talked about this, but you had to know that if you were going to get on the mat with this young man, he was 3 moves ahead of you at every given second. Every given second, he knew 3 things that he was going to do. And if you did one, he was going to do at least one of the other 2. And he had options and choices continuously. His mind was just a machine of working through and being in control of his opponents. They talked about cross country. Certainly that was remarkable. But being on cross country is one thing, but constantly setting goals and breaking your own records in that sport is another. And he continuously drove himself to be better and better. Of course, wrestling's not a team sport, and we're used to a lot of team sports in high school. If you have a bad day as a pitcher, sometimes your team loses. If you have a bad day as a quarterback, if you have a bad day as a point guard, sometimes your team loses. But I want you to think about the handful of years that Ed spent here and those couple of years as a state champion, and imagine never having that bad day. And it's all you. Match after match, moment after moment, whistle after whistle, for 2 years of not having that bad moment. The interesting thing about Ed is that he knew, somewhere he knew, that when he shook your hand, whether it was in this room right here or some other place across the state of Ohio, when he shook your hand at the beginning of that match and walked to that circle, he was going to beat you. He was going to beat you. What you didn't know, standing across from him, is how bad you were going to get beaten. You just didn't know. Imagine coaches, and Coach Dowdy could probably tell you stories much better than I do, but imagine coaches on his ride up to his junior year and his senior year, literally having to tell their athletes, in this sport, don't let him take you down to the ground. How do you stay away from somebody for 3 periods in that sport? Because if he takes you to the ground, you're going to lose. It was mentioned about his elevator ride up the first year, but I want to concentrate just for a moment about that second year. And I think there's some community lessons that we should be aware of. There's not a little pressure, it seemed to me, and you can tell, let me be honest with you, I've never won a state anything. But having a good friend that won twice, the pressure seemed to me that far removed, incredible. And I think we should just reflect on your peers, your friends, your community, the media, your school leaders, even elected officials. The moment he walked off of that mat as a state champion, year 1, that pressure started to mount, because the questions and the concerns and the would he, could he, should he make it again and repeat? And you live with that entire year. And I just want all of you to know that as a parish community, we should come together when we have these one-of-a-kinds. All of you, all 8 of these fine inductees being true one-of-a-kinds, that it wouldn't hurt as a community and as a parish and a family to once in a while give them a word of encouragement, maybe a note, maybe a pat on the back. As far as coaching, this is where good coaching goes into overdrive, because the coach knew that for this young man to be that successful and repeat, it was going to be a tremendous elevator ride back. And for opponents, yes, there were opponents that tried to knock him off the mat, but I have to tell you, there were times opponents were frightened. They were absolutely frightened. And the first thing they would do when Ed would meet them at the center, when they blew the whistle, they would run off the mat. Or they would get on the ground and crawl off the mat. There were times, and coaches could attest to this, Ed became so frustrated that he would grab the guy by the leg and pull him back to the center of the mat and proceed to pin him in front of hundreds of people. Now, why would he do that? Some say, well, needed this, needed that. To return as a state champion, you have to be pushed. You have to be driven. Somebody has to give you their best game all the time. And if people are going to not wrestle you and roll over, you are not going to achieve your ultimate goals. And Ed knew that. He needed strong opponents, and he needed folks that took strength and conviction and took it to him. As a classmate, and as you can imagine, Ed got a varsity jacket very early, I think maybe one of the first in our class. And it was decorated. And back then, I don't know, do they still do this? I don't know if there's, do you get these like diaper pins on your jacket? Do they still do this sort of thing?
Probably not so much.
But let me tell you, Ed had a bunch of them. He had so many of these so you get a pin every time you pin somebody, right? And they're going down here, and they're going down here, and they're around the back. I finally said to him one day, you look like a Pampers commercial, for God's sakes. And he looked at me like, what? I think his jacket weighed 50 pounds. The other interesting thing about Ed is when you're a classmate of his and you're going through the grade school, you're going through the cafeteria, et cetera, and you see third graders as Ed passes by, just like going like, and Ed was very humble. And so many of these awardees are humble people. And that must be a true characteristic, because his humility was tremendous. And he would stop and take a minute and talk with them. Then, as Ed left, I would say to them, so, would you like my autograph? And they would say, are you Ed Young? And I would say, no. And they were like, no, thank you. It just tremendous. Just a tremendous spirit and a tremendous aura among young people. It was mentioned, but faith is very important to Ed. His God, his love of his Savior and his Lord Jesus Christ. And that was instilled at a young age from his parents and his siblings and his school. We would expect that. In closing, the stats are on the board. In 1980, he was 119-pound, weight classification, 29-1-1. The following year, he moved up a weight class. Didn't even stay in the same weight class, moved up to 126, 38-0. The only two-time state champion in St. Paul history. This record has stood for greater than 40 years. The sign says it all. The legend, but our alumni, my friend, classmate, coached by Edward Young. So, thank you.
Man, thank you very much. I appreciate that. Marty said he was kind of surprised. I didn't know he was going to be here. He was my best friend, you know. Strangely enough, I wasn't his, but we were good friends for a long time. And I have to warn you, I was a much better wrestler than I am at giving speeches, but I do want to really thank everybody here. I want to thank the people that were responsible for putting this together. I'd like to thank you, Coach. Just an amazing person, and I'm just so grateful to him. Thank you to Jenny Ridge, my new friend. It was kind of rough on her the last couple of weeks. I wasn't sure who was coming, who wasn't, so I thank you for that. So, you know, wrestling is just such a great sport because it's not, you know, it's just you and another person. You know, it's a one-on-one sport. And there's only one winner. I did have 2 ties, but it always felt like I lost, you know. Wrestling is one of only 2 sports mentioned in the Word of God. So, you know, Jacob wrestled with God all night and wouldn't let him go till he got a blessing. And it's been a real blessing to me to be a part of wrestling. And it may sound cliche, but it's not if you know him. But above all else, I want to thank Jesus Christ, my Lord and my Savior. You know, he did. He gave me the ability to do what I did. You know, what I did with it was my responsibility, but I really could not have done it without him. And aside from dying on the cross, the greatest thing he ever gave me was my children. And so I want to thank my family. I love them. They're fantastic. I have 9 children, 6 grandchildren, and counting. And, you know, just it's the best thing I've ever done was having children. And I want to thank my wife, Ing, a beautiful little flower. And I just want to tell you I love you and I thank you for that. So, but I would like to just kind of talk about a few things that really kind of, in my own mind, helped shape me and mold me into, you know, who I am. You know, I didn't do this alone. There's a lot of people that helped me. And Jenny did, you know, to her credit, said I can talk as long as I want, just not here and not now. But, you know, my mom hated the idea of wrestling. And there's a lot of people here. Marty and I were talking about my mom. She questioned, why did I want to participate in that sport? And, you know, and understand, I love my mother. You know, she was truly an amazing person. I mean, her and her 9 siblings made it through the Great Depression to raise 7 of her own kids. She was an amazing person, but no one ever accused her of being subtle. And I was about to quote her at this point in the speech, but unless you knew my mom and you knew her complete lack of subtlety, you wouldn't have got it. And I probably would have tarnished her memory by trying to explain it. But suffice it to say, she was not a fan, you know, until she saw my first match. And then she became my biggest fan, you know, along with my sister Paula, who also never got the subtle gene. Chris works with her. And, but I had to tell her one time, I said, you gotta cheer a little quieter. I can't hear my coach, you know? And, you know, my father though, he, you know, on the other hand, was always an encouragement to me. And I mean, he, you know, my dad was just really proud of me. And as I'm proud of my son, Joe, he's a wrestler. And, you know, I just love you. But I think my dad was just all too eager to live vicariously through me. And to be honest, I kind of used that to my advantage on more than one occasion, you know. But it's not hyperbole when I say that if it wasn't for my mom and dad, I wouldn't be here today. Both a lot of different ways. Everyone in my family was made to take piano lessons. And if you were back in that day, you probably knew Mrs. Wheeler. I don't know if anybody here knew Mrs. Wheeler, but back then everybody took piano lessons from Mrs. Wheeler. And then one day my dad came up to me just kind of out of the blue and said, would you like to take karate or would you like to continue to take piano lessons? And that was the last time I saw Mrs. Wheeler. karate helped me to develop that mental discipline and focus, and I was able to completely lock in on the task at hand. It really gave me a mental edge over my opponents. And sports are so as much mental as it is physical. So, but not many people do know this. I was part of the cross country team, and Coach talked about it a little bit. And that was really a great group of athletes. And there was a guy, he was also a classmate. His name was Bill Stein, and he was a real hero of mine. But nothing about Bill said runner. He was sort of the Bernie Kosar of cross country. Somebody once said about Bernie Kosar, he ran like an elephant or a giraffe on Quaaludes. Certainly Bill should have been that graceful. But what Bill is that he worked so hard, and he's such a great example. He had terrible feet, and it hurt, and it was very painful for him. And he worked through. I mean, he was really an inspiration to me. And so he really showed me. I drew a lot from him. But running, the other sport mentioned in the Bible, is really a metaphor for life too. It's the most painful sport I was ever a part of. And we had another cross country. Congratulations, Nash. Cross country. I mean, it really is. It's 2.5 miles, 14 minutes of HE double toothpicks. It was just really a hard sport. Had a really great coach, Mike Reardon. And I can't tell you how many pairs of shoes I went through my junior year. I mean, honestly, he worked at a shoe store, and for good reason, because a lot of the shoes came out of his own pocket. And when you get a coach that cares that much, you have an obligation almost to succeed. And you just don't do this kind of thing alone. And I'm not here because of what I did. It's really because of everybody that poured into me. I'm going to recount just a couple of quick things. And then there's the most important thing that ever happened to me that I'm going to read. And it might be kind of surprising to you what it was. It had to do with wrestling. But St. John's Arena was quite a place. 20,000 people. Northeast Ohio loves, Northern Ohio loves wrestling. So we packed it out, and it was loud. And during the, the state championships, the finals tournaments, it was bad. I mean, you couldn't hardly hear yourself. And I got on that the mat my junior year for the finals, and I was so locked in. I told the karate kind of helped me do that, and all I could hear was Coach Dowdy. It was the strangest thing. It was as if he was we were in an empty gymnasium, almost echoed. And I've never had that experience before, but I could hear him yelling out instructions. So that was really a strange thing. But training for wrestling involves just really hundreds of miles, hours and hours of lifting weights, thousands of sit-ups and thousands of push-ups, and you practice moves over and over and over again ad nauseum until pretty much it becomes just second nature, and it's just something that you just automatically do. And my first match in my senior year, I wrestled a kid named Pat Scherzinger. He was by far the toughest kid that I ever wrestled, honestly. Even some of the ones that beat me, he just was a tough guy. But we got out front. The match started, and we shook hands. Obviously, the ref blew the whistle, and I didn't really plan this, but I stood straight up, and it was weird because Pat did the same thing, like just almost not even thinking about it. And as soon as he did, I hit a double leg, and it was the most perfect double leg I've ever hit. And it just felt so good. I mean, all those thousands and thousands and thousands of times that I did that, and that was the first time that it hit. In my mind, it was perfect. And so I just wanted it. It's a life lesson. You do things well enough, and if you want to do it well, you can succeed in that. But finally, the most important lesson that I ever learned because of this sport, I promise to share. And it was a little difficult for me to really kind of talk about it, but it's something that I think about a lot. And it was strange because I can't remember what year it was. I mean, it could have been a freshman, sophomore, junior. And sadly, I don't even remember who it was against. But the one detail I do remember is, strangely enough, it was right here that I remember that happening. And there was a kid that I was wrestling. And those details aren't really important because it really wasn't about who it was against or when it happened, really where it took place, but really what I learned from it and who taught me that lesson. So I was wrestling this kid here, and I was, kind of showing off. I was taking them down and letting them up and taking them down and letting them up again. And I was just playing it up. I was showing off. I was hammering it up. And, I honestly, I humiliated him. I mean, he had a dad that was proud of him too. And it wasn't good to that kid. So I got off the mat and into the grasp of Coach Dowdy. Grabbed me by the scruff of the neck. And he said, "Don't you ever treat someone like that again." Not even 100% sure of exactly what he said, but I know there was like smoke coming out of his nose and fire coming out of his eyeballs. And the greatest mentor that I've ever had taught me the greatest lesson that I ever learned about being compassionate, having empathy, and being a good sportsman. There sits that man right there. He personified for me integrity, compassion, commitment. He had the greatest impact on me. Coach, I've never called you Denny. Always called you Coach. It's not because I'm afraid you're going to make me run laps or do a bunch of burpees, It's because I respect you. I appreciate you. If it wasn't for you, Coach, I wouldn't be here. Thank you.
Wow. Thank you for sharing your heart. Thank you all. I don't know if I'm the best person for this job because I wear my heart on my sleeve and you guys call it my heartstrings. For someone whose athletic career ended in 7th grade after scoring 2 points in basketball, and that's real, and feel like I have a lot of growing to do as far as having a giver's heart. I'm very green. I feel this. I know I'm in a room of greatness, and wow, some incredible examples for the children that walk our halls, your own families, our parishioners. Thank you everyone for being here today and sharing your stories, opening your hearts. I know I've really enjoyed getting to know your story. And thank you. Thank you for being you. Thank you for all you've done and all you continue to give to our school and our community. I can't forget to ask all of you to stay behind, all of the inductees to stay behind for a group picture. But congratulations to you all, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day. And yes, thank you.